Alright, Cisco IOS Access, Chapter 2. So I'm going to go through some of the PowerPoint stuff, and then I'm actually going to pull up Packet Tracer, and at some point in time I'm actually going to grab some live equipment and do some videos so you can see the difference. So what is iOS and why do we need access to it? So just like any device out there, your home computer, your laptop, your phone, they all have to have an operating system. An operating system is an environment that allows a user like us to interface with the actual piece of hardware appliance. There's usually multiple components, and so shell, kernel, and hardware are all three different things you're going to hear about. So, but with Cisco switches, phones, access points, routers, firewalls, and just about any other device out there by any other manufacturer, they're all going to be running an operating system or firmware. There's all kinds of different names you'll hear it referred to. The operating system is going to be made up of components. Some have command line interface or CLI. We're going to make sure we understand that in regards to the Cisco. Some have GUIs. So a GUI interface could be a web or an application that we use to access the device. Again, with the Cisco right now, for your initial start purposes, we're going to be strictly using the CLI. So with that user interface allows us to send commands and do configurations and make changes to the actual piece of hardware. A kernel communicates between the hardware and the software. So there's a piece of software running on the hardware as part of the operating system. Windows has this, Linux has it, our Cisco devices have it. Pretty much anything else that you run into out there is going to have a device or something called a kernel. So that's a piece of software that's coded in with the operating system, and it allows the hardware to receive commands from the shell or from the user. It communicates again between hardware and software and manages how our hardware resources are used. Again, the hardware is the physical part of the computer or device. Example would be a Cisco router, Cisco switch, Cisco phone. So here's an example of a GUI. Obviously it's not Cisco. There are lots of them out there, and there are other pieces of equipment that do have GUIs. So this graphical user environment allows us to interact graphically with an environment. So here we have a Windows desktop screen where we have icons. Other things that have Windows would be Mac, Linux, Apple iOS, Android. GUIs can fail, crash, or simply not operate as specified. For these reasons, network devices are typically going to be CLI based. Newer, more up-to-date network devices, just so you know, work with a web GUI or a web interface to allow you to do things more graphically. So again, the purpose of the OS is to allow the user, us, to be able to control and make changes to hardware and get our hardware to do things. In a switch or Cisco environment, router, whatever that device may be, CLI is how we're going to make that hardware function on the network. It's how we're going to bring it alive or bring it online. So how would you access this CLI in Cisco? Well, I can physically break out my laptop, plug a USB to serial cable in, and then I can use this thing called a console cable on the other end of the serial to make a connection to the console port with the RJ45 in. It's pictured here on the right with the blue cable. So there's actually a physical port. It's labeled console. So just so you know, I see a lot of times people go in the lab with, I got to hook in to the equipment, and for some reason they plug this RJ45 into an Ethernet port. This is not an Ethernet cable. It's not going to work in an Ethernet port. Another port that they love to plug into is an aux, AUX. That aux port is designed for actual analog line, which is an old POTS telephone line. So we can dial from a POTS line at one location to the POTS line that's connected to our Cisco switch or router and gain access to the console or command line. Secure shell is another method. So this means that our piece of equipment has already been configured. It has an IP address and it's been configured to allow secure shell to take place. So we can actually get a CLI connection to a device over a network from within a LAN, or even sometimes from over the WAN or from the internet. Telnet is similar to Secure Shell. Telnet we don't use anymore because, as it states right here, it establishes an insecure remote CLI connection. So it's configured pretty much the same way as SSH, except it doesn't have the certificates and other things necessary to provide the encryption. Hence, it's unsecure, which means it can be man-in-the-middle. If you've never heard of man-in-the-middle, you can look up Telnet man-in-the-middle attacks and see how easy it is. And there's probably lots of videos on how it works and what happens online. So there are terminal emulation programs. I actually have both of these running, TerraTerm and PuTTY. I use each differently because they all provide different interfaces and they all work differently with equipment, but either application would allow you to make a connection to the console port. So you have to have two things. You have to have a terminal emulation program. You have to have a console cable that you can plug into the serial interface on your laptop or desktop. And those two things allow you to connect to the console port on the switcher router to make a established connection.